Good day, everyone, and welcome to our Phenix webinar series. We are very excited to have you all here today. I would like to thank Impact Community Capital, Nationwide, and Wespath for partnering with us on this episode about an impact investing response for the affordable housing crisis in the United States. My name is Viviane Cavalcanti, and I'll be your moderator for the day. Before we get started, I would like to quickly introduce you to Phenix Capital Group. We are an impact investing consultancy firm founded in 2012, and we aim to catalyze capital towards the sustainable development goals. Our services are meant to help institutional investors and fund managers to build their impact mandates and also to invest in scalable opportunities. In order to do so, over the last 7 years, we have developed an array of services to support investors. We have mapped the impact fund universe and listed over 1,600 institutional impact funds on our impact database. By subscribing to our platform, you will be able to filter this universe by asset class, SDG target, and other criteria. We have also been actively publishing exclusive market research and topic-specific deep dives, information about the SDGs and asset classes. In addition, Phenix Capital Group has been actively convening curated events to facilitate dialogue between asset owners and managers, and also to help them build a relationship. I would also like to highlight our impact fund assessment service, in which we evaluate the robustness of a fund's impact proposition within 6 dimensions, and we help investors to identify top-tier impact funds. All of these scores and reports can be seen in our platform. As a complementary service, we also publish monthly impact reports, which are targeted market deep dives. These publications also include a unique research based on our impact database and also interviews with key players of the impact investing universe. So now I would like to run you through the agenda of the day. We are very pleased to be joined today by Mike Lohmeier. He is Chief Investment Officer at Impact Community Capital, and he is responsible for the execution of the impact investment strategies. He will present an impact investing response for the affordable housing crisis in the US, and also give us an overview of this nationwide problem. We are also delighted to have Sylvia Ponecki, Director of the Positive Social Purpose Lending Program at Wespath Benefits and Investments, and she will give us a little bit of an overview of her role, the PSP lending program, and Wespath's exposure to the affordable housing issue. And last but not least, we're gonna have Luke Harms, Senior Investment Professional of Real Estate and Tax Credits at Nationwide Investments. He also will give us an overview of his role and Nationwide's exposure to the affordable housing issue. Luke manages a real estate investment portfolio of $4.5 billion. The last 30 minutes of the session are reserved for a Q&A round. You are free to send out your questions throughout the whole session. Now, I would like to hand over to you, Mike.
Thank you. As we just talked about, the session today will be discussing how affordable housing is often an overlooked sector in the impact investing marketplace. And I'm really excited to talk about Impact Community Capital's experience in that space and to be joined by Luke and Sylvia as well. First, I wanted to thank Phenix Capital for pulling this all together and for hosting the webinar. We appreciate all the work they do in impact investing. Impact Community Capital was founded in 1998 by several large insurance companies for the express purpose of making impact investing. And we like to joke that we were called impact investing before the GIN and others started even using the term in about 2008. And so our owners have been forward-looking throughout their investment histories. And that 20-year history has allowed us to originate over $2 billion of investments, financing over 48,000 affordable housing units in the US. And we're really pleased and appreciative of the support we get from Nationwide, Allstate, Farmers, Nuveen, and Pacific Life, who remain owners of impact and some of our leading investors in our impact funds. Through our history, while we focus on affordable housing, we have had several funds that were not directly related to affordable housing. We've had 12 impact funds, and 5 are still in various portions of the life cycle of a fund. We focus on several SDGs, and we think affordable housing is a great way to meet the needs of several of them. Obviously, sustainable cities and communities is an important part of our focus in affordable housing, but also it helps us reduce inequalities, fight poverty, contribute to positive health outcomes, as well as provide access to decent work, as well as educational opportunities. One of the reasons why affordable housing, particularly in the US, is so important is that there's such a supply and demand imbalance. In the United States, there's over 14 million, there's a shortage of over 14 million of affordable housing and available rental units for low and moderate income families. And it's not just in California and New York and places that you typically think of the high cost markets, it's actually throughout the United States. And what it does is it limits low and extremely low income households, their ability to pay for other things, to have access to quality schools, to live close to their jobs, to have extra money to go to the doctor on a voluntary basis. And so we think affordable housing is really a critical need as well as an important opportunity for institutional investors. One of the things, over the last year, there's been a lot of discussion in the United States and other places around the world about reducing inequalities, particularly across racial divides. And in the United States, that's been a highlight of those discussions. But it's important to note, there is a disparity in incomes across whites, Blacks, and Latinos, and it impacts their ability to get affordable housing. So, for example, on the chart on this slide, we look at the hourly wage percentiles for 1 and 2 bedroom housing wages. And what that is it's the wage needed to afford a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in their locations. And this is across the nation, so it's average. But just looking at that broad national average, Black and Latino workers are about 25%, they earn 25% less than whites, and they're almost 44% and 42% more likely to spend more than 30% of their incomes on housing. And that reduces the income available for, like I mentioned, healthcare. One of the things that's important is that housing tenure is longer if you have access to affordable housing. And so educational outcomes are greater for children because they're not constantly moving schools. And so it's important to think about these additional effects of affordable housing, not just meeting this, excessive demand. At Impact Community Capital, we've focused our program on the low-income housing tax credit program here in the United States. This is a federal tax credit program that provides incentives for equity investors to own these properties, to develop them and own them for 15 years. We have developed a program that focuses on the first mortgage debt on these properties. We like the characteristics of it. They're usually low loan to cost, low loans to value. Obviously, because you're providing affordable rents, they're more income constrained than a market rate apartment. But we feel that the program provides incentives for the equity to continue to pay the debt. And we like the way that it's performed. And so our program for years has had a really strong credit performance as well as investment performance in our mind because it's based on this unique investment opportunity. So lastly, and before I turn it over to Sylvia, Impact Community Capital takes this needed impact-oriented investment opportunity in affordable housing. And we look at it and we look at ways we can focus on several SDGs. And we take what we've learned as a very kind of unique investment manager. While we do manage institutional portfolios under investment management agreements, and so we look and walk like a regular investment manager, typical in impact investing markets, you also have to be there kind of at the birth. You have to act almost as a midwife, putting together transactions that meet your impact objectives as well as your financial objectives. And since many of our owners are insurance companies, they have unique regulatory and credit requirements that require some structuring. And so we've built an expertise in securitized affordable housing debt and doing whole loan mortgage programs and working with municipal bonds and working with tax exempt bonds. And that's allowed us to come up with unique ways to achieve sustainable development goals for society. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia, who's going to talk a little bit about Wespath's program.
Thank you, Mike. It was very interesting, the insights you shared. Now I would like to turn the floor to Sylvia Konecki. Sylvia?
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you to Phenix Capital for including me in this webinar. So just a little background on Wespath. Wespath is an agency of the United Methodist Church and currently manages over $28 billion in assets and investments on behalf of pension participants and institutional clients affiliated with the church. So in terms of impact investing, we actually have a lengthy history in impact investing. Our early investments focused on affordable housing and community development. In more recent years, we also began evaluating and investing in strategies focused on other impact themes, including sustainable agribusiness, energy access, and renewable infrastructure. This has been across fixed income, public equity, private debt, and equity platforms. But I will say I attribute the support that we have now for expanding our impact investment portfolio to the successes that we have seen through the Positive Social Purpose Lending Program. That was our entry into the impact space. So the Positive Social Purpose Lending Program is Wespath's longest running impact program. It was started in 1990, and we just celebrated its 30-year anniversary in 2020, so last year. It was established for the purpose of supporting affordable housing and community development to underserved markets and populations. And over time, we have invested in three main categories through the program. The bulk being in affordable multifamily rental housing for families, for seniors, and populations with special needs. And this is similar to what Mike described under his program. The asset class is supported by the low-income housing tax credit for the most part in our portfolio. In addition to that, we have also done investments in community facilities such as homeless shelters, clinics, health centers, and charter schools, and in international microfinance in developing markets. Now, in terms of structure, we are investing in the first position debt of the capital stack for these projects. We're not direct investors or lenders, rather we work through a network of intermediaries that present us with loan investment opportunities that we participate in over time. And our intermediaries are typically nonprofit community development financial institutions who provide us with initial due diligence and underwriting of the transactions. They monitor and service the loans for us over the investment period. And in the majority of cases, they also provide credit enhancement on the loans that we are investing in, which provides Wespath with protection from potential losses over time. And that's been a proven concept over the program's 30-year history. Since inception, we have invested over $2 billion through the program. And as I mentioned, the majority of that has been on the affordable multifamily side. And that has resulted in a cumulative investment in that specific space for us of about $1.9 billion over the 30-year period. And it has resulted in the creation of over 52,000 rental units over that time. So very proud of the program and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sylvia. It was great to see Wespath's role in the affordable housing universe. Very interesting. Now I would like to hand over the floor to Luke Harms. Please, Luke.
Hey, how are you? Hey, first I want to say thanks to Sylvia, Mike, Impact Community Capital, and certainly Phenix Capital for the opportunity. Nationwide's a Fortune 100 US-based company. We're out of Columbus, Ohio, focused on insurance and financial services. We employ 34,000 people, and our investment portfolio is more than 120 billion in assets under management. My role in this conversation is as an investor and investor representative or a placement agent within the affordable housing equity space. I know Mike went through quite a few slides of the Impact Community Capital focus, which is on the debt side. If you were to look at a few of his slides, he did have the words LIHTC equity, which is the low-income housing tax credit equity. And my team primarily focuses on the tax credit. We call ourselves the tax advantage investment asset class. We touch quite a few different components as part of the capital stack. We are housed within the real estate investments team. Vivian mentioned my portfolio was $5.4 billion, of which $3.5 billion is focused on this LIHTC equity, or what we call affordable housing. I've been in the space for 16 years. However, Nationwide started the portfolio in 2000 or 2001, so it's 20, 21 years old, depending on how you look at it. We also invest within the federal historic preservation, federal solar, and various state-based premium tax credit platforms. And then I also mentioned we invest within and I manage a third-party platform, which includes 40 funds across 12 different third-party investors. So we have quite a bit of exposure in the affordable housing LIHTC space. As for my slide, I have included a few slides within our 2020 corporate sustainability report. My goal in that is just to show that the affordable housing space is just a small piece of the pie to the larger corporate sustainability. And you can see that I'm represented with the $3.5 billion in affordable housing. We also invest within, renewable equity, renewable debt, and then a larger part of the corporate sustainability is the reduction of the carbon footprint, landfill diversion, water use. We are a farming-based insurance company. We started as the Farm Bureau of Ohio. Sustainable farming is a component of our sustainability, reducing waste, and of course, the aforementioned renewable energy.
Thank you, Mike, Luke, and Sylvia for sharing such interesting insights with us. I would now like to open the floor to our audience. Please submit your questions if you haven't done so. And to start, I would like to ask Sylvia, where does your organization allocate to affordable housing? If you have a designated impact allocation, or is it within your fixed income real estate allocation strategy?
So as I mentioned in my presentation, the way we are structured and the way we make our investments through the Positive Social Purpose Lending Program is it's structured as debt. And so the PSP lending program sits within our fixed income platform. And then within that, we have distributed the PSP assets across a number of different fund buckets. And those fund buckets actually have specified ranges or targets for PSP and how much PSP can go into those buckets.
Yeah, our allocation is I would say quite complex. In the larger sustainability initiative, we're a small piece to the pie. There are components of impact strategy, tax liability, but also, as I mentioned, we manage third-party capital. So not only am I coordinating with internal strategy and internal tax departments, I'm also coordinating with external strategy and external tax departments. In any given year, we could have an internal need, 300-400 million. We could also have an external third-party investor need of 200 or 400 million, depending on the broader needs of the industry, but also each individual company's needs. So,
very interesting. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Mike, what investment characteristics to affordable housing do you think that fit well in impact communities portfolio and your strategy? What is it unique about it that you focused on it?
Yeah, I'd say that it offers a really unique place. When you think of impact investing, the broader industry, a lot of it's focused on private equity. In the US, there's a lot of workforce housing equity funds. And so those equity funds are looking for equity-like returns. So low teens to high teens returns. But there's an acceptance of a lot more risk. By focusing on affordable housing in the US and focusing on these first mortgage debt investments, by pairing that with the low-income housing tax credit equity, we reduce the risk quite a bit. And so I think the characteristics of Sylvia's program and our program is really low-risk investments with what we think are attractive yields. The performance history, so there's an accounting firm, Cohen Resnick, that does a survey of low-income housing tax credit properties in the US, and their cumulative default rate, and this is as of 2019, from 1987 through 2019 was a cumulative 65 basis points. It's hard to find another commercial foreclosure default performance. And what that means is that we have an extremely low risk investment, but we're getting 250 to 300 basis points over a comparable treasury investment. And so you're looking at a credit spread that's really attractive when you look at the credit characteristics versus investment grade corporates, low investment grade corporates. It compares very favorably. So the returns we think are attractive and our investors have. Secondly, because there's such a demand of affordable housing, it far outstrips the supply. These properties are occupied. The occupancy in an affordable property might be 98, 99% on average. Whereas in a typical multifamily, depending on the market, it could be, obviously a little bit different in times of COVID, but traditionally 95% occupied. Maybe in some markets now it's a little bit less. And what that means is the cash flows are stable. And so if you have a good operator, a good investor like Luke and his team who are doing their job on the equity side, you have stable cash flows and you have consistent debt repayment. And so we like that stability. And the spreads themselves are stable because it's a small market. We're a small firm, right? And so if they're larger fixed income shops want to get into the space, it's not big enough for all of them to play. There's only about 2 billion, maybe a little bit less on an annual basis, first mortgage investment opportunities on tax credit properties. And so the big players generally don't allocate the resources. And what that means is that at the beginning of COVID, they went up. but they come back down. They don't move. The variability is lower, and we like that. And so you have a stable, consistent performance that we think are attractive yields. And we think that makes it a unique place. Look, right now we're talking about 5% is the typical kind of coupon on an affordable housing deal. That's not 14%. And so investors need to realign their risk return framework to think about the risk that's being mitigated and the place it can play in their portfolios. And that's why, with Sylvia and Luke, we're talking about, it plays a different role than a traditional impact investment.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And you said that the risks are very limited, but how do you look out for the risks in your affordable housing investments? Is there a recipe that you follow?
There is, and I think Sylvia probably has a similar recipe, and Luke does as well. The first is finding a quality developer to partner with, somebody who has experience that any federal in the U.S. or government program in other countries. Obviously, there's your bureaucracy you have to deal with, but there's also pretty detailed regulations that relate to how the property has to operate, and compliance is important. So an experienced development team is really important. So we look for that. The other is, while across the country, there's a lot of need for affordable housing. In some places, particularly smaller metro areas, it's more challenging to make affordable housing properties work. So we have to be really clear. So one of the things we look at is the gap between the affordable rent and the market rent. We like the market rents to be well above the affordable rents, so that demand is there. If city A, the market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $600 and a tax credit affordable rent is $600, there's not a lot of demand in that market. And it's harder to fill that because there's many more options for your residents to get an affordable place to live. And so we look at the market dynamics about the gap between market and affordable rents. It's really important. And then, like most traditional real estate demand drivers, the ability of that experienced manager to manage expenses is really important, because rents are tied to government set levels. And so rents go up slowly. And if you don't manage expenses, you could run into cash flow problems if you're not really good at making sure the maintenance is getting done in an efficient way.
Thank you. Sylvia, do you do anything differently, or do you add something when you're looking out for risk?
Yeah, I would definitely echo everything that Mike already said. I mean, our view of how we evaluate each transaction is very similar. Definitely a very strong development team is a must, someone with experience. The industry also does like to see new players in the space, but even when those new players enter the space, they like them to partner up with groups that are knowledgeable and have a history of working with these types of properties. For us, the one thing I wanted to add to your previous question, and then also respond to the current one, the fact that we're a pension fund, we have a long-term outlook in terms of how we invest, our investment approach. And so the loans that we're investing in, they align really well. They match that long-term outlook really well, because most of the terms on these loans are anywhere from 15 to 30 years. So kind of a very good match from that perspective. That's also a risk, because we are also in these for a very long time. And so we need to make sure that the management of these and the oversight of these isn't only focused on the front end, where there's underwriting that's taking place and making sure that things pencil out. We also need to have staff and individuals and groups in place that are able to manage the back end risk, where oftentimes the older the properties get, the more issues that may come up, and there needs to be a way to work those issues out. So again, echoing Mike's comment on the strength of just the development team, and then also our team. We have a long history of, an experience in the space, and I think that has really helped over the course of the program's 30-year history of being able to manage successfully with very minimal losses on our program over that time.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, Luke, do you have anything to add?
Yes, from an equity perspective on the fit within our investment portfolio. So when you're in an equity, when you're the equity of a real estate transaction, you get to share in some of the depreciation. So while Sylvia said it's a long-term view, on the equity side, it's also a long-term view, which is quite unique. You get to share in the depreciation, so you not only are you decreasing your taxable income, but you also are receiving tax credits. So you're dollar for dollar decreasing your tax liability. Both of those are excellent components within an investment asset class, because what I'm competing against across the floor, across our investment floor, are all pre-tax yields, where my after-tax yields are actually right on top of pre-tax yields. And Mike went into the actual percentage itself. From a risk standpoint, this is a public-private partnership, and so there is not a lot of juice to squeeze out of each deal. Each one of these is underwritten at a 1.15 debt service coverage ratio. So from a revenue and income revenue and expense standpoint, they're tight deals. They're designed to be tight deals. When I go to investment committee and present a deal in front of the corresponding commercial mortgage, normal multifamily senior debt group, they're looking at 1.5 to 2.0 debt service coverage ratios. And so I have to show that long-term track record that Mike talked about. Another interesting component to the risk that wasn't mentioned from Mike and Sylvia is that there's a compliance component to who we rent to. Mike alluded to the reduction in rents. So not only are we renting at a reduced level, but there's a reason you're getting that reduction in rent. You have to qualify to live in our units, and so there's I would say unique compliance monitoring. So while we partner with strong developers, and while we partner with operators that are efficient and can manage expenses, and while we look for great real estate fundamentals, and while we understand the discount to market rent that Mike talked about, there's another component of compliance. Does the operator have the compliance controls in place? Does the manager have the controls in place to understand the risks of the compliance? So I would say that's probably the value I can add to those two questions.
An extremely important value, I would say. Yeah, it makes it a little bit more tricky.
It does.
When assessing, yeah, exactly. How do you measure and monitor the impact in your affordable housing investments? Do you have any tools that you use how do you know the effects of the affordable housing in the community? How do you measure them?
Yeah, I'll take this one first. Ours is extremely simple. We focus on dollars associated with units, translated to families, overlap with a geographic component. They're as simple as that sounds. This number of millions of dollars in the Pacific Northwest focused on Seattle, 10,000 units focused on 20,000 families. Just as simple as that sounds. Now, we also track and have within the portfolio, in the industry, they're called set-asides. But it would be a deal that is specifically focused on housing formerly homeless, formerly addicts, mother households, a focus on formerly abused mothers, mentally handicapped, people that have tested positive for AIDS or HIV, veterans housing, and of course, the most popular, seniors housing. And so those are really the two simple components to our measuring impact. Dollars out, number of units equated to family over geography, and what population are we serving? Are we serving families? Are we serving these specific populations?
Okay, yeah, interesting. Yeah, Sylvia?
Yeah, we are very similar to how Luke approaches it in terms of measuring things. So we also track number of projects we've done on an annual basis, number of units either preserved or created, looking at population served. We also look at jobs created. We have done kind of studies on that as well in terms of, how much the tax credit really kind of helps boost the economy in that area, and how many jobs are created because of that project being created. We report on our accomplishments both internally and externally. So on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly or annually, we are reporting to our senior leadership team, to our board, in terms of progress under the program and how much pipeline we have. And then in addition to that, we're also regularly issuing different reports and other things to our participants and institutional clients. And on a biannual basis, we have been rolling out a sustainable investment report that focuses on our impact activity. And a good percentage of that report does focus on the positive social purpose lending program and all the different accomplishments through that program. So just that's a very important thing to our participants and our clients. Just being able to be transparent on how much has been done through the strategy is something that's sought after quite a bit when we're presenting to these different groups.
Yeah, definitely reporting is very important, I would say. Yeah, we have a question from the audience to you specifically. Jerry said, our community is a smaller metro area. They're looking to expand affordable housing. Could they reach out to Wespath or for support, or how do you get connected with projects in communities, or is this done by third parties?
So we actually have had a number of groups reach out to us directly. The way we're structured, I think I mentioned that briefly in my presentation, is we work through a network of intermediaries. So these are groups that are actually pre-approved by us, and they are the ones that are presenting us with different investment opportunities. What I typically do is I speak to whoever's reaching out, get a sense of where they're looking to develop housing or expand their housing program. And what we do is we typically connect them to one of our intermediaries or a number of intermediaries that are active in that specific space. And that's the best way to do that. I would say that in addition to making that connection to our intermediaries, we're often connected to other resources within the housing industry. Prior to Wespath, I worked for a housing authority, so it's a small network, and everybody kind of knows the different programs that are offered nationally through these different agencies, and so we're usually able to make a number of different connections for the groups that are looking to expand on their programs.
That's great. That's great. So you do get connected with the community somehow. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Michael, we were speaking about how they measure and monitor the impact done in the affordable housing investments. Do you have anything to add and explain to us how Impact does this?
Yes. So in affordable housing, what's interesting is because there's a physical asset, as Luke mentioned. So there's a unit in Seattle. That's where the impact is. And it has impact over time, right? Because there's a family living there starting day one. They may live there for 6, 8, 10 years, and then there's another family. So you can have, there's a multiplier, right? Because once you develop this community asset, it has, a long life to it. And so that's one element of it. We do look at the number of units. We look at the units by income category. So how many 20% area median income tenant units are there? How many 40% area median income tenant units? As Luke mentioned, we look at the gap. So from an underwriting perspective, we want a big gap between market rents and affordable rents. But we also measure that from an impact perspective, because that's essentially the discretionary income we're giving back to people. That's the additional money every month they can go out and buy healthier food, go to the doctor, have a better commute to work, those kinds of things. We also look at the special needs populations that we're serving. So we haven't talked a lot about this, but there's a great need in affordable housing to provide services to help people improve their lives. So if it's a family development, you might have tutoring and educational programs for children. You might have English as a second language in some markets. You provide services, and typically there's a community center to help the units. In senior buildings, a lot of times it might be having a healthcare provider maybe come in once a month to do blood pressure checks and senior health and wellness discussions. There's also other populations that are higher need. Particularly if you're talking about the lowest income levels and the formerly homeless or the current homeless, who may have associated mental and substance abuse difficulties. And so in those properties, there's a lot of services. They're called service rich to help those folks get on their feet. In America, it's called a housing first kind of approach to homelessness, which means you give somebody a unit and then you surround them with services to help them stay in that unit and get off and help address the underlying causes for their homelessness or extreme low income, and so that they can rebuild their lives. And so we really like those properties. And so we monitor and measure which properties are serving special needs populations and what kind of services they provide. And then over time, Luke mentioned, one of the things that we like, because the government has a bigger hammer than we do, is this compliance element. From an impact perspective, we know that the tenant income certifications are going to be reviewed at some point by the allocating, agency within that state. And so therefore there's a strong incentive, both from Luke's side, from the equity telling the developer and the property manager, get your tenant income certifications done, serve the populations you told us you're serving, as well as the government doing it. So we feel that there's a strong incentive. And so we like that because it gives us comfort that our impact story isn't just day one, it's an ongoing story. And so that's a little bit how we get impact. That's interesting. So you also take into account the services that come with, it's not only about the building itself and proportionating these people new places to live, but also what comes with it. That's, yeah, very interesting. We have a question about how would you align affordable housing with Paris Agreement? And given real estate has such a very large carbon footprint, how do you measure your output versus outcome? So in terms of the Paris Agreement and energy efficiency, there's two elements to it. One, obviously, we encourage it because it does improve operations in many markets. The cost of providing heating and cooling and operating the building is lower. Again, it's good expense management. It's a strong developer. It leads to stable outcomes. One of the challenges in the affordable space is that because you have the government involvement and the government is allocating these tax credits to the property, properties are scored. It's a competitive process. There might be in some states 4 and 5 times the demand for low-income housing tax credits as there are properties that receive them. And so the government incentivizes things like green building techniques by their allocation program. And so we're a little bit out of that design element in that when the deal comes to us, and this is a little bit different than on Luke's side, it's kind of baked. So if there's a deal in Boise, Idaho that has, and it's 60 units, the design of it's already been pretty well set. And so we don't have a lot of management of that impact, but we do look for it. And there are programs on the secondary market by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in particular to incentivize green development by offering more favorable loan terms and/or they reduce their guarantee fees, which reduce the cost of capital ultimately for the borrower. And so there's a couple of ways to get at that. Yeah, how do you measure your output versus your outcome because of the large carbon footprint of the affordable housing? Yes, some developers on the equity side, and I'll let Luke and Sylvia talk a little bit more about it then, because we're not on the equity side. There are development companies on the equity side that have done a really good job of measuring and reporting their outcomes, particularly in energy efficiency. One of the things that's unique is that a lot of the tax credit program, a significant portion of it, and the portion that we typically finance, is new construction. So you don't have that same metric of like reducing carbon emissions because it might have been a cornfield at one point and it had limited carbon emissions, probably maybe soaking up carbon, and then it was turned into a development. And so you don't have that before after measurement, but they still can look and measure the actual outputs or the outcomes in terms of what that property is producing. And so we see that in a lot of times on the equity side. Luke, on the equity side, do you want to add something?
So we do have a little bit of influence at the beginning of the deal as to its LEED certification and or its green attributes. I would say that a very large number of deals within our portfolio actually have solar panels on the roof. And it's a way for the development to actually not only receive low-income housing, affordable housing tax credits, but also federal solar tax credits. It's fairly common in different jurisdictions that actually, and Mike talked about it, give extra credit on the tax credit application in the QAP, it's called, California being one, Puerto Rico being the other, in that you pretty much have to have solar panels on top of the roof of the actual deal itself. Michael is right in that it is a carbon output building a unit. I would also say a decrease to the carbon footprint would be a preservation deal in which a former deal that wasn't certified from green attributes now is certified with new insulation and new windows and specific siding and a reduction of, with solar panels, also roofing as a component of that certification. And so it's all part of that mix.
It's not so straightforward. You have to consider other verticals in the affordable housing, yeah.
Yeah, I would just add, again, we're closer to, our approach is closer to Mike's, just because once the deal comes our way, it's pretty much fully baked. We know exactly, the structure of it, the types of features that are included. But I will say that we have seen an uptick of a variety of different energy, features in these properties. And when we do see that, we specifically report that out in terms of, the construction and what's been included in the scope of work. Same thing, we'll see a variety of different certifications. A recent deal that we invested in is using passive house design, which focuses on energy efficient features in the construction of that property. And I will add that, just because of, I think, our tenure within this space, and I would assume Mike and Luke agrees, initially, years ago when these features were first starting to be introduced into the scope of work, there was a lot of resistance because they were unproven. They cost a lot, on the front end, and they were not proven to, kind of result in any savings to tenants, to the project over the long term. What we have seen now is that they are proving out. It may cost a little bit more, on the front end to put these features into the project, but there's definitely savings that are resulting from that over the course of that project's life cycle. So, we try to report on that as much as we can if it's part of the scope of work within each of these projects.
Okay, thank you. And despite of the fact that now, as you said, it's easier because it's proven, do you think that what's changed with the COVID crisis? Did it affect also your investment processes, reporting, long-term loans, or the specifics?
I'll start a little bit. So I think last March, so a little over a year ago, there was great unease about what impact COVID might have, because obviously people didn't know the depth of what the crisis would be and how it would impact affordable housing. And so there were a number of federal programs, both to help tenants. So there were eviction moratoriums. They still are in place in many parts of the United States, actually in the United States in general too. Forbearance programs were created to allow borrowers who couldn't pay their mortgage, both on the single family side, but in the multifamily affordable housing rental space, programs to help them get through the crisis. And then there were, foreclosure moratoriums. So the lenders couldn't take action if a borrower didn't pay, in the court system to enforce their rights. And so there was a lot of concern, like as a lender in particular, like what is going to happen? Like we're going to have delinquencies, we're not going to have non-payment. What are we going to do? And as it turns out, it really was kind of a blip. Part of it is that the equity investors, so folks like Luke, they look at these long term, and they look at, one of the things is the properties really stayed occupied. So while there was unemployment and dislocation, one of the things that the federal government did in the United States was it enhanced unemployment benefits. It provided stimulus payments. In many cases, that helped bridge the loss of income that these tenants had, and they were able to pay their rent, which in turn allowed the developers to pay their mortgages. And so we had, in total across, we have over 400, almost 500 properties that we have in our current portfolios. We had 8 forbearance requests, and 7 of those went through that process and have been repaying as planned. One is just entering its repayment period again. And so that's a lot less. I mean, we had, kind of like office bets, right? That people do sometimes, well, what do you think the number is going to be? And it's far lower than I think anyone expected. So the federal response really helps support affordable housing. And then as we've come to I hope it's the end. I hope it's not the middle, but it's not the end of the beginning, to use Churchill's famous quote. The additional federal stimulus in the form of rental assistance directly to properties has really supported it. So COVID has been, in a sense, almost a positive for affordable housing, because the next layer of the federal response in the US focuses on infrastructure and expanding affordable housing programs to help meet the pre-COVID need, but then also to continue to meet the need going forward. And so we're encouraged. We think COVID and the federal response to it has been a positive.
Thank you. Luke, do you have anything to add from an equity perspective?
I'm not going to come out and say that this is a recession-proof asset class, but what I will say is that yes, during the beginning stages of the COVID pandemic, we did do well. Mike talked about all of the programs that helped keep us afloat during the downturn in 2008, 2009. We also did well. And what we've learned over the course of time is that because we are renting to what would be low to middle income families, these families are used to living paycheck to paycheck. They're used to having to make priority sacrifices, and rent seems to always be a priority. And I think Mike said that we in the United States had in addition to unemployment, we found month over month over month over month, when we went back year over year over year, our collection percentages, our economic occupancy were all trending almost exactly as they were in 18 and 19, as they did in 2020.
And I would add the same thing for our portfolio. Our size of our portfolio is similar to Impact's. We have about 400 positions in a portfolio, and we only saw 3 forbearance requests out of all of those deals. And these were short-term. They're already in process of repaying that forbearance amount. So a very stable portfolio. I will say the only thing that we did see a little bit of impact on was our forward commitments and the construction period. I think initially when the pandemic started, there was concern. There were some pauses to construction just to make sure that, you know, safety standards were in place to protect the workers. So there was a little bit of delay in terms of getting deals to the finish line, but they caught up pretty well. And then also, you know, from a conversion perspective, there were on occasion a few projects where COVID did have an impact on the actual tenants and the ability to lease up quickly. People were either staying in place where they were and weren't inclined to move into the new apartment, or the actual process was just a little slower again because of, you know, safety standards being in place.
And I did see a delay in some of the deals that we call pre-stabilize or during construction or lease up. Specifically talking about lease up, to piggyback off of Sylvia, I did see a delay in senior housing lease up. We felt as if the seniors were less technologically advanced to do a virtual visit. And so the seniors housing did lease up slower than the family housing. Family housing leased up and trended the same year over year. I did have 2 forbearance modification requests on federal historic hotel deals. I only had a few, I would say, penalty waivers. So in the program, if you lease up slow, there are penalties on the equity side. I had a few requests, 2, 3, 4 requests on the equity side to waive those penalties, to which we've worked out some sort of equity modification too. So very small impact overall.
Yeah. Considering the size of the pandemic, I would say that the impact was very small. Yeah. It was not so reached out. Yeah. So in the interest of time, the conversation is very good, but yeah, we're going to have to wrap up. And to wrap up, I would like to ask you, what do you think is the most important aspect that can be extracted from the session? And also, if you can give an encouraging message or advice to investors who are looking to get started in the affordable housing space.
You have 3 groups here that manage third-party capital. And so to get into the affordable housing space, it would be fairly easy to do so, being that Impact would manage debt. My team manages third-party equity. Sylvia's team also manages debt and specific impact investments. It's more of getting your corporate initiatives to align with the availability of deals. I know Sylvia talked about the network of intermediaries. She called them. I also have a network of intermediaries that can help connect investment to actual deal itself. I think that's more of an easy connection than actually getting a corporate investor to buy into the asset class itself.
Yeah, I would say that experience and networking are a must in this industry. Just kind of following up on what Luke said, an investor wants to see, especially investors such as ourselves, we're long-term outlook. We want to make sure that whoever we're partnering with has the capacity to take these deals out for 15 plus years, and make sure that everything is performing as it should. So a lot of oversight is required. It took a long time to kind of build out a program that kind of covers everything that needs to be covered. So I would say make sure that you're making the proper connections and talking to the appropriate people kind of in the space. And so that's where the networking comes into play. A lot of different organizations offer trainings and make connections between the different kind of levels of groups that work on these types of projects. So kind of read through things and talk to people first before jumping in and kind of really getting started with a program like this.
Yeah, and I just add, in terms of, the way institutional investors can get started is, one, you have to think about internally some of the hurdles. I kicked it off by saying affordable housing is often an overlooked impact investing sector. It's not quite as sexy as the other things, right? We're not getting double-digit returns, and we're not solving, the renewable energy crisis, but we're providing tangible assets in their communities. And so that's one of the things is, think about becoming a champion in your organization and using it to point out that these are things where potentially workers from your, workers, stakeholders, clients, customers, where they live. And so you're building a better business by helping support affordable housing in your communities. And these are visible, tangible things. We've taken our board and said, look, here's a building we've done. I've taken investors on tours, and that's important to make it real and to folks. So one is think about how you can connect affordable housing to your stakeholders, shareholders, employees. Secondly, I'd say, don't think of it as a separate asset class. We focus on the debt side. So it's clearly a debt investment. Luke focused on the tax advantaged aspects of it. And so depending on your organization, work with that group to help them become champions of it as well. Because I have approached a lot of institutional investors, and the most frustrating thing for me, kind of pitching impact and what we can do in affordable housing, is the shuffle. Well, we don't do real estate debt here. You got to talk to the real estate debt people, or the real estate equity people, or we only have a separate impact investment program, or our foundation is down the street. And so becoming a champion in your organization and connecting, like Sylvia said, to folks who can help you pitch it internally will really be a good place to start and build the momentum to get into affordable housing. Because like I said, we think it's attractive, lower risk, appropriate return. It's, as I used before, it's not sexy, but it can be, it's really needed in the communities, and it can be an important part of an investment platform.
Thank you. So networking, very important for our audience. Yeah. So thank you, Mike, Luke, and Sylvia, for sharing so interesting insights with us. We highly appreciate how you brought the topic alive today and clarified our audience questions. Thank you all for listening, participating also so actively. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can see our contact information on the screen. Before we go, I would just like to invite you to sign up for our upcoming event, Investor Connect, to be held between 15th and 17th of June, virtually this year. Over this event, we will facilitate a series of pre-arranged one-on-one meetings between a selected group of fund managers and institutional investors, promoting an excellent and efficient way for investors to explore scalable impact investment opportunities across all asset classes, SDGs, and impact themes. We will be posting the registration link in our chat box right now, and also recirculating it together with the webinar recording. It was a pleasure to have you all here today. It was an honor to have this discussion with Luke, Mike, and Sylvia, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar. Have a great day.